is the Rebel Call. Welcome to today's show. I have to show you what aired on CNBC in the last 24 hours. And it's a video, and there's news articles out there from NBC talking about how the U.S. government is buying and then destroying homes. And they're trying to explain to you why, because they don't want you to be suspicious at all as to, why the government is using your tax money to buy up homes in areas that are conveniently getting wiped out by weather that the government is creating. And then the government, if you're able to salvage your home in that area that's clearly got a bullseye on it, well, the government will come in and say, hey, we might have missed out on damaging your home, but there's a chance it could end up being flooded anyway in the long run. How about we just use our taxpayers' money and we buy your home? Huh? Well, of course, anybody out there who's paying attention to what the government's doing knows exactly why the government's doing this. I mean, you can take a look at Maui, for example, right? A lot of people in Maui didn't want to sell their homes to corporations like BlackRock and Vanguard. They didn't want to leave Maui in general. So once they got hit with a direct energy weapon, they didn't really have a choice. They were eventually formed into what will be eventual permanent Fema camps. Now, for those of you that don't know, Fema, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is the same government agency that we've seen over the last 20 to 25 years that has spent our tax money on buying millions, and I mean millions, of coffins. If you haven't seen all those pictures of coffins lining up on the side of highways and in the middle of government-owned properties, well, of course, those are coffins for us, and we just saw the first round of why they needed those coffins, really. And FEMA are the same people that conveniently show up whenever whenever a hurricane or a tornado organically appears. Well, FEMA will show up, and of course, they'll provide aid. They'll tell you to leave your home. They'll tell you to come with them, come into these little safe haven homes that we have built up. It's a little safe haven community. Don't be suspicious of these little communities that look like little prison cells that we've built around Maui. Don't be suspicious. We're doing this to help you. And of course, eventually, when people don't have a choice, they'll be going in there and they'll have to have a mandated you-know-what inside their body to enter. But while FEMA's doing that, people out there don't realize that FEMA is actually scooping up these properties. So think about it from this perspective. The government, which has the ability to weaponize weather, look no further than what we just saw in Dubai, how they're trying to, and told us they want to change the infrastructure in Dubai. It's going to eventually be a major smart city hub. Well, what they've done is they've flooded it out. And they don't want you to be suspicious of the fact that they've openly bragged about having the ability to do that. Well, everybody out there should know the government has the ability to do it. This is patent. This is something that the government in the United States used during Vietnam, and it's something they use every day. They used it in Katrina. They continue to use it, right? So what we're seeing is the government is using weaponized weather. They're drilling homes in clearly areas they want to herd like sheep or cattle. They want to move people out of these areas. So they're drilling in weaponized weather. FEMA's coming in and providing quote-unquote assistance. But people out there don't realize that FEMA is literally offering your tax money to give to these people who have land on this specific property, so that in the event they think they're going to rebuild or want to use their insurance money on it, well, don't even worry about it. Don't be suspicious that the government, who doesn't have the authority to do this, is coming in and offering to buy out the property of these people who are either having floods or could potentially be the victims of floods in these areas, which of course the government has marked out because they clearly want these areas. It's a government land grab, and don't be surprised again if they end up taking that land and building giant FEMA camps on those land, but clearly they don't want you living in these areas. And this is a way that the government is tricking people out there into giving them their land, right? Remember, our government is in so much debt. This is what they tell us day in and day out. But they can afford this, right? Don't think about the mortgages and the connection between the government and the banks. How in the world the government is allowed to do this, right? Don't think about that. What people are actually aware that their government is buying up land and seizing land? Nobody is, right? So when CNBC puts this story out there, people out there should be waking up. And even in the comments section, you do see people who don't understand what's going on, right? And then they don't understand what's going on in Maui. Then they say, but wait a minute, I thought there was a housing shortage. And we have the government buying people's land and then they're just bulldozing it and leaving it? Well, exactly. Your tax money is helping fund the government's destruction of the United States of America and ultimately hurting all these people out of all this area of land to move them into a more compound, smart prison. Okay? This is what aired on CNBC. And yes, people in the comment section, surprisingly, weren't understanding. But of course, they'll never understand. If they don't see this and understand that this is government overreach, then why in the world would the government, why would they take this under their hand? Why would they have anything to do with this? Okay, the people who bought the property are liable for this, right? They bought property in an area that could eventually be flooded. If that eventually happens, well, you have homeowners insurance, et cetera, you have flooders insurance, et cetera, et cetera. But the government seems really concerned about this area of land. So what they're doing is they're hitting it with weaponized weather. Then they're coming in, and if your house didn't get destroyed, well, the government is going to tip you off with a little bit of cash coming out of our pockets to make sure you do leave, which shows us that they are literally hurting people using weaponized weather. Look at this.
The U.S. government is buying up and then destroying American homes like this one. Some homeowners in floodplains may voluntarily sell their doomed properties to the government.
Since 1989, FEMA has funded something on the order of 45,000 to 50,000 home buyouts.
FEMA is estimated to have spent somewhere around $4 billion on the project so far. But that's just a fraction of the total amount spent on buyouts, since there are programs outside of FEMA. But not everyone is convinced buyouts are a good idea.
It's a bit of a mixed bag. I think in some cases they're successful and in some cases they're not.
Any person that is moved out of harm's way is a positive move forward, provided that they're given appropriate resources to move and to start their lives anew somewhere else.
Because there's so much variation, sometimes buyouts are heartbreaking, and sometimes they're a celebration.
Kind of tugs at my heart a little bit. I was there for 17 years. I'm like, they're going to tear this house that I was living in down. I miss the neighborhood, but I'm happy in this location. It's not in a flood zone.
Buying up homes and demolishing them seems pretty counterintuitive to solving the housing crisis. The U.S. is still short up to 7.2 million homes.
We're talking about a crisis of affordability in housing across the country, combined with the crisis of the climate change effects. How do we ensure that we provide for our population while making sure that they're not in harm's way?
So do floodplain buyouts help or hurt American homeowners? And can the U.S. afford to bail out communities?
The general way that floodplain buyouts work is that a disaster occurs, there's damage done to people's homes, the community, the local government, they decide that it might make sense to offer buyouts to residents in those damaged areas. Most often, the local government and the state then request funding from the federal government. They receive the funding, they make an offer to purchase a home from someone who has a damaged home. That homeowner decides whether or not to sell. If they sell, they relocate somewhere else. The government owns the property. They demolish the home and create open space. And there are almost infinite variations at every single one of those stages I just described. But that's the really general process.
These homes are often located in the floodplain, or an area that is deemed likely to flood. One of the most successful buyout programs has been in the area near Charlotte, North Carolina, where there's almost 20,000 acres of floodplain. Over 475 homes have been purchased since 1999, relocating over 785 families and businesses outside of the floodplain.
My name is Andrea Jones. I'm 59 years old and I work for a bank. So I've been in the banking industry for 36 years now. And I moved here to start that job and I stayed. Didn't have a reason to move back to South Carolina until now. I moved with the buyout program in May of 2023, so 10 months now, 11 months now. I do consider myself a member of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community because I still work there, and that's where I do the majority of my shopping. My doctors are still there. I didn't move any of that because I'm not that far away. So I am still a member of the community. I just don't live there anymore.
The county says $90.5 million have been invested from federal, state, local, and other sources, and claims it has avoided $40.9 million in losses. Some of the largest programs that support floodplain buyouts are FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant and 3 programs from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD.
They all come with different requirements, different provisions.
For example, from FEMA, the flood buyouts tend to occur for severe repetitive loss properties. through several floods. For HUD, for example, if the state chooses after a disaster to use its funds to allow for buyouts, then those homes that went through the flood are eligible.
On average, federal buyouts can take 2 to 5 years, though 80% of FEMA acquisitions are approved in less than 2 years.
And it's a long time to wait if your home has mud in it and you're trying to figure out whether to rebuild or not.
And it usually is predicated on which program is funding the buyout.
Some buyouts have happened in as little as 3 or 4 months, especially when the funding comes from the state or local level instead of the federal.
It was a letter sent through the mail, and it was sent to all of the homeowners on the street. Within 3 years of me being in the house was the first time I experienced the heavy flooding. It came up to my mailbox. You could not see the street. You could not see the beginning of my driveway. A couple of years later, the street flooded again. Because of the pandemic, finally got everything completed in December of 2022. Signed my contract for them to purchase my house in January of 2023, and then we had to start the appraisal process. Once they did the appraisal, I did a second appraisal. They allow you to get your own. The one thing I didn't like about that was my appraisal had to include the flood zone. And I thought because my house was not in the flood zone when I purchased it, that I didn't have to do that. But they said, yes, I do. Once I found a home, the process was easy. I told them when I could move, and we scheduled the closing. So the home that I was in, we closed on a Thursday, and then I closed on this home the very next day.
Andrea said some of her neighbors took the buyout, but others didn't, especially those who didn't have a mortgage.
The estimates of homes in the United States who are at risk of being flooded ranges from somewhere to between 4 and 41 million by 2100. That's a big margin of error, but regardless, if we've spent the last 30 years buying out 45 to 50,000 homes, and in the next 80 years we need to do 4 million, we're nowhere near the scale that would be required.
The FEMA grants are funded through a cost share, where the federal government provides 75% of the money and the remaining 25% comes from a
Come on.
For this issue.
I'm sorry, I gotta skip some of this.
Would be decibel.
I can't stand the
offer.
Right now, the way the
annoying
situation in which
voices. We get the gist.
On this
People are brainwashed and they'll follow the government, whatever they say.
Our government is spending...
And it simply remains a vacant lot.
So again, some of the articles out there coming out at the same time. Here's why FEMA, right? Just like that video. Here's why FEMA has spent $4 billion to destroy flood-prone homes. Can I repeat that? Our government is spending... Remember, this is our money. Okay? They like that. The way they talk about it now, people out there don't even realize that it's their money. It's almost like they feel like when they pay taxes, which they do in a sense, that they're giving their money to the mob, right? Like, we have to pay it. Well, you have to pay it because your government is held accountable for the money. First of all, they're supposed to tell you where your money goes and what it's going towards, okay? And they really don't for the most part, other than saying, well, we're giving it to Ukraine, right? Well, now they're telling you, hey, you know, the government is spending $4 billion to destroy flood-prone homes, and people should go, wait a minute, we're in debt, we have a lot of homeless people, well, shouldn't we be building homes instead of destroying them? Well, they're destroying them because, of course, FEMA is going to be herding you out of these areas into areas they want you to live. These will be areas that are completely controlled via technology. You won't be able to farm, you won't be able to do anything on this land except, of course, be compliant. So... this article says just an inch of floodwater can generate tens of thousands of dollars in property damage. Homeowners trying to move and start over after such a disaster might find a surprising buyer for their home. The government. Yeah, don't be suspicious about it, right? Just an inch of floodwater, and the government's coming in and offering you money for your home. And everybody's okay with this. The FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has spent around $4 billion assisting with the purchases of 50,000 plus damaged homes going back to 1989. These homes have been marred by floods to the point where the homeowners decide to move away. Listen to this. To encourage homeowners not to sell to new buyers and stop what Siders calls that terrible game of hot potato. FEMA's hazard mitigation grant program supports local and state governments in purchasing the homes, demolishing them, and turning the property into public land in what are called flood plan buyouts. So let me repeat that. The government so what we're seeing is the government mapping out where they want us to live, right? Where they want to eventually move us. They have this blueprinted out. We don't see it yet. We don't know it yet. But what we could do is watch these places that are getting hit with hurricane after hurricane after hurricane, tornado after tornado after tornado, and then of course watch how FEMA moves in, right? So they're coming in and they're saying, don't sell your house, okay? Because it's a terrible game of hot potato. So you might make more money selling this land to somebody, but you should sell it to us because the person who buys the land is going to get flooded again, right? And no one's suspicious about why the floods are occurring because, of course, there's the boogeyman, the built-in boogeyman called climate change, right? This boogeyman exists so that you don't question what the government is doing. And, of course, if you question it, you don't understand science or you're questioning science, which is now officially illegal, except, of course, if you're questioning if men can have babies, because apparently that's a sane ideology to have in 2024. So you saw the clips in there, okay? You saw these people talking about, well, I was able to buy, I ended up having to move, I bought a more expensive home with higher interest rates. So we're allowing the government just to start off. I mean, just think about this. We're allowing the government to use weather against us, okay? No one's ever going to understand that because it's too hard for their brains to grasp. Like I said, they've used things, quotes like you can't control Mother Nature, etc., to convince you that it's impossible for them to do this, even though everybody out there who's paying attention can see all the patents the government has. We can see Operation Popeye. We can see it all, right? Then we see strange storm patterns hitting specific areas over and over and over again. Then the government is coming in. They're not just setting up FEMA. They're telling people, like they are in Maui as well, that they're not going to be able to rebuild where their house once sat. But the government will give them our tax money to seize that land. And does it go back to us? Will they tell you that it's public property? It's public property that nobody can buy. So it's technically government property. So the government is buying land of civilians with our money, and then they're deeming it land that nobody can build on. And of course, don't worry, because eventually everybody who is giving into this doesn't realize they'll be living in FEMA concentration camps because that's essentially what they are. So this is the same organization that's piling up coffins on the side of the road, that's building pop-up communities, trying to make it look like this dystopian hell. People out there are like, this is great. And everybody's got the same little cubicle, the same little tiny home, which is another thing, by the way. I've talked about over the years how they put all this propaganda out there about tiny homes, HGTV, all these channels have continued to pump it out. People out there are like, I want to live in a tiny home. I want to. They don't even realize that they're getting conditioned into eventually living in a tiny home. The government is going to be giving out tiny homes to people. You're not going to have to pay for it. People are like, that's great, that's fine. And we're all going to be prisoners in these little cubicles. It's literally going to be like Ready Player One. They'll put a nice little garden out front. You have 5 feet between your neighbor. It's the illusion of freedom. Okay, we're seeing it all over the place, popping up in Canada. They just did one in Canada. Did anyone out there see it? They just did it in Canada. Okay, so that's eventually what it is. And if you look at FEMA and the housing they're building, this is permanent housing that they label temporary housing. You just never get out. They should just call it Hotel California or Hotel FEMA. Okay? And people look at it like, that's so nice of them to do this. That's so nice of our government to give us a new home after you look at it and you go, they're killing you with a smile. They're the one destroying your home, and then they're giving you maybe what was, what is like 1/10 of what your home used to be, a little cubicle for you to live in. But if you actually realize, if you put prison bars on that, okay, it'd be the same exact thing. But people out there don't realize it. They don't see what's happening. They're killing you with a smile. They're stealing from you with a smile, and they're imprisoning you with a smile. And this is just proof. This article, this video clip I showed you, here's why. Ladies and gentlemen, here's why FEMA is spending $4 billion. When the government's supposedly $33 trillion in debt, they're spending $4 billion to help destroy homes when there's a housing crisis. Oh! Don't think any further than what the article tells you, folks. If you do, you're a conspiracy nut. They want to help. Don't you get it? They want to help. They want to buy people's land for less than what it's worth with our tax money and then not let anybody else ever buy it again because they've got plans for you. And again, they're hurting you like cattle. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always and your families.